You'll just be in a time of prayer with me. As I think about that, even just word gravity, I'm just going to ask you to do something. Can I have a physical prayer with me for a moment? Just a physical ritual. I'd like you to just feel your feet in the ground. Just really plant them firmly. Sense that you are a part of this world. And not just a part of this world, but a part of God's world. And then take your hands, just kind of put them on your legs, put them on your knees, and just kind of press in and feel your body. As you feel your place in this world, and as you feel who you are, that your identity as a follower of Christ, that you have meaning and you have purpose, that I just ask you to ask the Lord to envelop you with love, to come to the places within you that may feel unlovely or unlovable and fill them with love. To come to the dark recesses of your heart where they're difficult, there's pain, there's things you've done or that have been done to you, and just ask God to hit there too, to fill you with love. And just feel the gravity of that love. Just feel it. God, thank you for everybody here participating at the journey. Thank you for not only that we are able to find our identity in you, but we are reminded each week that we identify with the church. That your love changes us from the inside out. Thank you for all you do, Christ. Thank you for loving us. Amen. So I want to tell you about Susan today. Susan, like some people, struggled with her father, mightily struggled with her father. It's about 15 years of struggle through her adult life, to the point that their relationship had completely severed after Susan's mother had an untimely death, cancer, about 4 years ago. Susan felt that she would never need to go home again after her mom died. Susan had effectively, after the funeral, cut her dad off from her life. Now, much of this was just a lot of deep resentments that had built over the years. A lot of it went back to things that had happened when she was a kid. Some of the ways she felt treated as she was growing up. To her, it was so ugly, it kind of like was over, it was done. And then she learned her dad had prostate cancer, and things actually weren't looking good. So she decided that she was going to give a try at forgiveness. And she wasn't sure what to do because it was just kind of wonky. It was hard for her to figure out, how do you forgive? And so talking through this idea of remembering the hurt, said, well, kind of think through the pain that you really have. And one of the ways to do that, and maybe I would open this to you, is instead of thinking of all the pain, you kind of get some events and you think through those and just why those events were so difficult for you. Some of these can be pretty massive traumas, but some of them can be just things that seem to change how you saw that person. For Susan, she wanted to give this forgiveness thing a try. When she was young, she spoke of her father just always seeming to be at work. But she also felt that he was available to everyone, except for her, his only daughter. And when he was at home, he was just gruff. It was hard to live with him. He never seemed to understand her. By the time she got into her teenage years, it got just more and more difficult. And she said the event that's just stuck in her mind, it kind of encapsulated a lot of the feelings she had about her dad growing up, even into adulthood. There was this painful memory, was kind of as vivid as if it happened yesterday. She said as a teenager, she was looking forward to her first prom. Pretty typical stuff. And she'd been asked out as a sophomore, which was a very big deal in her school. And she said she was the envy of all her friends. She was going to go to prom as a sophomore. And the weekend before prom, she was excited, hopeful, and she stayed out with her friends, having a good time, not doing anything wrong, just being a kid. In fact, she said, I was at Friendly's ice cream shop. I was drinking sodas, just having fun. And out of nowhere, suddenly, in horror, she looked up and she saw her father striding towards her in the very loud Friendly's shop. She was mortified because she hadn't realized in all the fun and all the adventure and enjoyment, she was almost an hour past her curfew. She was even more mortified, though, when her father dragged her by the arm from the restaurant, not saying a word, in front of everyone, tears streaming down her face, and took her into his car. And then it happened. He got her home. The only words he said to her, "There's not a chance you're going to prom next week." Now, in adulthood, she cried as if this happened the night before. Just this specific hurt, but for her, it encapsulated a lot of the pain she felt, the reason she cut off her dad. But she really wanted to practice forgiveness. And healing this particular wound kind of could set a lot of things right, she felt. In fact, one of the things that happens when we forgive certain instances and certain people is it actually opens up our heart to more people. It makes us more forgiving of everyone, more loving, less judgmental. People that we don't agree with, we don't immediately kind of put in an other category. We actually think of ways to bring them in. This is what Susan wanted. But trying to understand her father was going to be really tough, because it is a big jump to go from remembering the hurt to understanding the person. But as an adult determined to forgive, she uses this instance as a start. So she tried to do this understanding thing. She began to imagine, what would my father have felt that night? And so she went back and told the story from her father's point of view. And she started to remember tidbits of his way over angry, way too intense, way too physical night. His over angry speech came back to her with little words, little sound bites. She recalled him saying, "We were worried sick." She remembered he talked about Jennifer. That's right, we know Jennifer is an inexperienced driver. That's what he said. He even said it was so late and we were scared. And Susan started to imagine his fear. She also remembered, it wasn't just Dad. Mom got super anxious and worried all the time. I can imagine how she must have been and what she must have been saying to Dad and why he came. And as Susan continued the process, she remembered that she often pushed the limits with a pretty rebellious attitude. She thought her father was far too insensitive, and he was far too insensitive from some of her stories. But for the first time, she realized, I did a lot of provoking. And in understanding, it didn't make what her father did right. In fact, it made it more obvious just how wrong that was, because she was now open to the path of forgiveness. And so Susan started to do this kind of next step. She started not just to understand, but to embrace forgiveness from God and from others. It's not enough just to go, okay, I forgive you. I've got to understand just how much I've been forgiven. She started to remember multiple times that her own father and her own mother had forgiven her. And as she recalled them, she realized there were a lot of these. She was definitely not a perfect kid. And above all, she was deeply religious. Her faith mattered a lot. So she had always embraced the forgiveness of God. She wanted the forgiveness of God. And then she thought, that means I need to figure out how to forgive as well. And so that night, before bed, she prayed to God and she forgave her father. And she woke up the next day and she just felt a little bit of a weight lifted off of her. And it feels like, oh, that was that. All tied up, nice little bow, everything worked well. Now we kind of can figure out what forgiveness is, except it wasn't. Because the next morning, she started to feel some of the same hurt when she thought about phoning her dad. Some of those same feelings started to come up, some sadness, some anger, some resentment. Had she not forgiven? I mean, it felt real. It felt like the process was right. Was she really not over it? I mean, how do you hold to forgiveness? When I read Paul telling us as the church how to live, his kind of end point is always forgiveness. And he does this. This is what he says in Colossians 3. He said, as God's chosen people, you are holy. That means you are set apart. You're different. You are supposed to be not just cultural, but subcultural. You're supposed to be different. People are supposed to see you and go, something's different about that person. The way they talk, the way they behave, the way they act, the way they accept and love. There's just something different. As God's chosen people, you're holy and dearly loved. So clothe yourself. This idea of clothe is to put it all over you, that it's so obvious that people see it. Clothe yourselves with compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. And when you clothe yourself with that, you will bear with each other and you will forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. You will forgive as the Lord forgave you. And I want all of this to be true of me. Maybe you do as well. I love this picture of putting on this clothing. I want to be these things. And I also want to forgive. And even after I let things go and I forgive, the memories come back. The same anger comes back. Sometimes the same inner conversations can come back. That even though you embrace God's forgiveness and you embrace the forgiveness of others, it's hard to let things go. It's kind of like looking in a mirror. Most of the time, I look in a mirror, I see myself, I move on. But every once in a while, I notice when I look in a mirror, and I'd say this happens about once every couple months, I'll just look in a mirror and I just see the light hits it just right, and I have this scar right here. And I never noticed this scar. I'm sure all of you are like, yeah, we see it every time. No, but notice this scar, it's right here. I'm like, that's right. I have a scar there. And I got knocked out cold playing football. And my scar here, my head, gushed blood. And as it gushed blood and I got knocked out cold playing football when I was young, I was taken to a hospital. They stitched it all up. It looked pretty ugly for a while. And then it healed. And I was fine. And I don't think about it much. But every once in a while, there it is. And I see it, and I see where all those stitches were. And we have these on our heart. We have these scars. And we may go for a little bit of time, and then it hits again. That's right. I'm pretty upset at that person. That's right. They did me wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I talked last week. They're disordered, or they're emotionally unregulated, or maybe they've had something happen to them in their life. Whatever it is, they did me wrong. And it's hard not to want to stare in that mirror at those scars and let the unforgiveness start to come up again. It starts to question whether we've forgiven or not. We may see the other person, we may hear about the other person, and we're reminded once again. So we need this final step of forgiveness, like something that really stamps it, that helps us understand what's happening. I like to call this, how do you hold to the forgiveness? How do you deal with the scars as they come back up, the memories? So I want to give you a few ideas today that kind of encapsulates the whole series and gets you thinking about how do you hold to something that's so painful so you can emotionally, mentally, and spiritually let things go that have happened to you. This does not mean you will not forget. You will not forget, I promise. But you will learn to forgive. Now, the first thing I would have you think about doing is to hold to forgiveness is critical ignoring. If you don't know what critical ignoring is, we talk a lot in this culture about critical thinking. Critical thinking, you're probably familiar with. If you're not, it's about evaluating issues and ideas, thinking deeply about them, forming ideas. I mean, this is a fine thing to do, to critically think. Try to teach my kids to critically think. I think it's really kind of an important thing to critically think. But critically ignoring might be just as important, if not more important. Critically ignoring is the ability to choose when to ignore things that come in your mind and really process how to do that different. Because we all have limited time, emotions, and energy. Now, one of the things I do to critically ignore, I did this yesterday. Not because of this, it just happened. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about tomorrow. Yeah, thanks God for giving me a reminder. I literally out loud will just say, stop. I will see my mind going. I'm thinking about something that's bothering me, or someone that's bothering me, or a past issue, and I will be doing something, and I'll see my mind going, and I go, ooh, time to critically ignore. Stop. For me, that works. It's helpful. Stop. And I start to think about something else. I use critical ignoring with my wife all the time. My wife and I have been together 30 years now. There are things my wife has done over the last 3 decades that have hurt me. She has said things, she has behaved in ways, she has acted in ways that hurt me. Now, you all see her, and she seems like this lovely human being. She is. She's really nice. She's genuinely nice pretty much all the time. But sometimes she does things that hurt, and they make me sad, or they make me angry, or some weird combination of both. And the saving grace for our marriage for all these years is I've never done anything wrong to her. She's a very lucky woman. Very lucky woman. But sometimes I do think about the things I've done wrong to her in our marriage. There's no running tally, but I have definitely harmed Wendy more than Wendy has harmed me. Like, I can tell you that guaranteed. And some of that harm is just like, oof. I'll think back, and I'm like, ooh, man, that was rough. I wish I hadn't acted like that or said that or been like that. And I think, what if my wife had a running memory of all the times I hurt her in big or small ways? I mean, those resentments would continually bubble over. She'd say sideways comments to me. She'd purposely kind of be mean to me. She might gossip about me to others. It might even kind of be a never-ending thing because there'd be so much wounding. I'm always stunned the amount of people who are in relationships like that, whether it's a marriage or friendship or family. These things are just coming out all the time. Resentments. And I thank my God that my wife is really good at critical ignoring. She doesn't hold these things. She forgives, and they may still be there, but she's able to let go. It is vital to be able to do this so that you don't just sit in the pain of the past. Because that one thing becomes two things, and then becomes 50 and hundreds, and now you've built up enough resentment for the rest of your life. And one last thing on why critical ignoring is so important. That stuff leaks into all your relationships. It's like you can't help. As soon as you've built that up against one or two or three people, it's hard not to get that sideways talk, a little bit of gossip, a little bit of resentment in a lot of areas of life. So what's important to do is to then burn forgiveness into your memory. We are hardwired to remember these painful events. But to shift our memory to forgiveness, we have to create an impactful and important memory of forgiveness. I do not think it's enough just to go, okay, God, I forgive this person or this situation. I forgive, and move on. It doesn't really work. Our brains don't seem to work well that way. We have to have something impactful. We have to have something important. Here are some ideas. I put some up there. Face-to-face forgiveness is a way to do this. This is rare. I'm not going to ask you all to go do that today. Don't worry. It is rare, but it is impactful. It is important. It can change us. It can burn a memory into our brain that will not leave. Another one is to do some sort of physical ritual. I would encourage you, if you want to forgive and you want to stamp it so it's in your memory, so that when you think about the event, instead you think about the forgiveness event rather than the painful event, make the forgiveness event a big deal. Physicality can really help with this. Go on a hike in honor of that forgiveness. Run a race, bike a race, climb a 14er. At the end, make a point to forgive. Kind of shed that and say, I've done this and this is me shedding that. So in the future, when your memories come back, as they come flooding back, you go back to the event of forgiveness, not the event of pain. I've had people take some rocks and walk around a lake. And as they walk around a lake, they use the rocks as they throw them in as symbols that they are forgiving. Just something to see, visual, physical, as a reminder. Another idea would be to write a letter. You may or may not give this to the person, but you can read it. You might even have someone else read it. Sometimes you could even make this part of the physical ritual. Go on a hike or climb a mountain or do something like that. And then at the end, you would, tear up that letter or appropriately burn the letter or something like that. Sometimes people even write themselves a certificate of forgiveness. This one seems a little odd, but this actually works. On this date, in this place, I forgave, and they have it, and they sign it. These are ways to burn forgiveness into your memory so it replaces the hurtful memory. And now you get to go to that. And so I also give you this third option. Recite a mantra. This might be the easiest, most obvious one to do, and I would encourage you to start here, if anything. I had a betrayal by a friend about 15 years ago. One of those betrayals that there was something about it that I couldn't let go. I had dealt with it. I felt like I was kind of done with it, but it just wouldn't stop coming back. And here's what I kept catching myself doing, having conversations with that person over and over and over again. And it's nice when you have conversations on your own with that person because you always win. So it's fantastic. And I started to feel this bitterness isn't the way I want to live. So like that scar on my forehead, that bitterness started to kind of gush blood and it wouldn't stop. And that figurative blood, it was the hurt and anger and resentment, and I was really betrayed. And I remember feeling genuine feelings of contempt. Contempt is a really nice way to say hate. I hated that person. And one day, God got a hold of me, kind of shook me up, and said, you need to forgive this because it's coming out in other ways. So I started the process of forgiveness. I will remind you, forgiveness is almost always a process, not an event. It takes time. I remembered the pain. I attempted to understand this person. They were very emotionally unstable, and it came splashing out on me. And so I began to forgive. And I did, but it took me a while. And by the way, the scar has never really left. Every once in a while, even thinking about it this last month, the scar is still there. But it's covered up by the memory of the forgiveness, which is the memory of some growth that happened in that time. The memory of God changing us from the inside out. The mantra, reciting a mantra, it's a reminder that forgiveness is that process. I kind of think of what Jesus was doing with Peter's question about forgiveness in Matthew 18. It was a pretty innocent question. Peter comes up to Jesus and he says, Lord, how many times shall my brother sin against me and I still forgive them? In Jewish tradition, this was a simple answer, real easy, 3 times. 3 times. You hurt me once, forgive. You hurt me twice, forgive. You hurt me 3 times, forgive. That's it. Cut off. I'm done. In most cultures of the day, that was actually a lot. Peter comes up to him and says, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? And he doubles it and adds 1. 7 times? That's a lot. It's a whole new way of thinking outside of Jewish tradition. And Jesus looks at him and says, I do not say to you up to 7 times, up to 70 times 7. It hadn't been that long since Jesus taught his disciples how to pray. He'd instructed them in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So the always inquisitive Peter here, he's got some questions about the extent of forgiveness. That 7 times felt like a large number. When Jesus replies 70 times 7, the point is not for us to get fixated on some exact number. Is it 490? It's not a checklist or a scorecard as Peter was trying to do. The phrase 70 times 7 is a certain number to use to kind of signal this uncertain, nearly indescribable amount. When Peter asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive? And maybe you ask that, how many times do I have to deal with this? How many times do I forgive? Jesus essentially told him, as many times as it takes. As many times as it takes. This was the passage that got me through what happened to me 15 years ago. As many times as it takes. And when I was actively forgiving that person who wounded me, I began to recite a mantra. Here was my mantra. I'd forgiven this person. I'd gone through it all, but it just kept coming back. And I said, God, I have forgiven blank. God, remove my resentment. At first, no joke, I recited this 20, 30 times a day. This thing was in me. I couldn't let it go. And I would just keep reciting this, trying to change myself. But as the days and the weeks went by, it began to lessen. And I'm not sure how many times I said the forgiveness mantra, but I do know it took me over a year to feel fully settled. Now here's what's cool. I've had some other things happen since. I've had some people really hurt me, purposefully hurt me, wanting to hurt me. And because of the practice, it's now so much easier. I still recite the mantra, but it's so much easier, so much faster. So as the worship team comes forward, I'm going to ask you, just in a moment of prayer with me, as we get ready to go to the Eucharist table. Just be in a prayerful state again, and I'm going to ask you to consider, What is the name in that blank spot for you? We talked a few weeks ago about who is in the chair across from you. Could you start the process of forgiveness today? Could you lay down your ego, your need to be right, because maybe you are? Your need to hold that bitterness, possibly even that hate. Can you lay that at the foot of the cross at the table today? And start the process of forgiving. Maybe the person who has hurt you has been hurt in their own life. And maybe they haven't. Maybe there's just something wrong there. And it's been pretty vicious, and you didn't know what to do. But you can forgive. God is right here alongside you. You are not alone. And as you consider that person, or maybe there's a few names there, and the hurt they caused you, ask God to come alongside you as you walk the journey of forgiveness. Take that name or names to the table today. Maybe have a mantra as you are there, a mantra of forgiveness just between you and God, and begin the process of forgiveness. When you're ready, there's tables to your right or your left, up towards the front. You simply take the bread, dip it into the wine, and you will bring it into your body. If you're a guest with us or new to the journey, the table is always available to you. Please come and join with us. Let me pray for us as we go to the table. Lord, this is not easy stuff. Forgiveness. But I ask you to continue to clothe each person here. Clothe them with compassion. Clothe them with kindness. Change them, God. Clothe them with kindness. Clothe them with humility. God, clothe them with gentleness. And clothe them with patience. And let our identity be found in you. We are children of God as we grow in our ability to forgive as you forgave. God, as we all come to the table with a name or names, be kind to us, God. Come alongside us. We seek you, God. Thank you for your body broken, your blood spilled at the cross. Amen. The tables are open. You can go when you're prepared.